Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are looking at all the books that I read in the month of May. And I had a surprising number of books that I read, partially because at the end of May I just went on a spree. I read so many books. And so in the end, I read 9 books and I DNF'd 3. The DNFs I will be talking about separately in a video to come. But for now, let's just jump right into the books that I did read. And the first one is Chimes at Midnight by Shannon McGuire. This is the 7th book in the October Day series. In this series, October Day is a half-human, half-fae changeling knight who has a very strange set of skills, and so she gets asked to solve some very strange problems. In this book, Toby has decided to take on the goblin fruit trade. Goblin fruit is a lovely narcotic if you're a full-blood fae. It gives you some very pleasant dreams. If you have even a drop of human blood in you, however, it is the most addictive substance that they know about, and you will just waste away until you die. So that is why Toby has decided she needs to deal with that particular problem. Now, I do have a full-length review for this book, so I will try to keep it pretty brief. But essentially, I think that this story is very good. I think that the pacing is very good. Our antagonist, I hate them so much, so I guess they accomplished that job pretty well. I thought that the backstory additions for Quentin and the Lushak were lovely. The only problem I really had with this book was the fact that it was goblin fruit, and so you started getting into some very slapstick comedy kind of ridiculousness. I mean, the characters do address the fact that this is stupid and ridiculous about how we talk about it, but I still don't love it. But overall, I gave this 4.5 stars. And then later in the month, I read The Winter Long. This is the 8th book in the October Day series. And in this one, well, I can't give you too much of a description because honestly, it would all be spoilers. But essentially, there is an antagonist who comes back and antagonizes Toby, and she's got to deal with it. There you go. This is, again, I have a full-length review for this, so I won't be terribly going into a ton of depth, but essentially, I thought that the plot was very good. The pacing was good. It tied together a bunch of loose threads from previous books that we didn't even necessarily realize were loose threads. There's a ton of revelations, including a bunch of backstory for people. There's more interesting things about the fairy world. And it was just overall very, very good. And I really liked that the Lushak plays a much larger role in this than she has in previous books. And overall, I gave this 5 stars. This is one of the books that we have been trying to get to since the beginning of the series. After that, I read Shadow Study by Maria V. Snyder. This is the first book in the Soulfinder trilogy, but the 4th book in the Study series. So let's start with a description. Our main character of Ilona is a magic user, and she kind of represents a country of magic users. Her lover is Valak, and Valak does not use magic, and he represents a country of people who don't like magic users, and they are trying to prevent a war between these two countries. Now, let's start with this thing. So Ilona is the main character of another trilogy, the Study trilogy. And then Maria V. Snyder wrote another trilogy following a different main character, Opal. And it was all set in this world, and the Ilona and Opal interacted with each other. And then she wrote this series. The problem that I ran into was that if you did not read the Opal trilogy, which I didn't because I DNF'd it, there's a lot of stuff in this that doesn't make a ton of sense. And so they're trying to remind you of, remember this thing happened? And I'm like, no, I don't remember it. I need more context. And so I was a little frustrated with that. There's character perspective shifts in this, which is not great. It follows Ilona, and it follows Valak, and it follows a third character of Jenko. And they rotate through perspectives on different chapters. But Yelena's chapter, for example, would end on a cliffhanger. And I didn't care to keep going because I knew I had to get through a Valak chapter and then a Jenko chapter, and then I would finally get my resolution like 25 pages later. So I would put this down at the end of a chapter and just not have any drive to pick it back up because I knew I had to wait for that resolution. I did actually like that we got more backstory on Valak in this book, which is something that was definitely missing from the first trilogy. However, the transition into these memory sequences that give us that backstory was some of the worst writing that I have seen from Maria V. Snyder, and the memory sequences themselves were way too long. It was just drawn out unnecessarily. So not great for that either. I thought that the storyline was okay. It served a purpose. I'm just not sure what that purpose was. It wasn't amazing. And then this book ended in a way that I was not happy with. It was one of those things where you see it coming and you're just like, oh no, please don't do that. And then she did it. So, great. But because of how it ended, I did go ahead and read the last chapter of the third book in the trilogy, which I currently own. And because I saw where it was going, I saw the trajectory, and I wanted to see if I was correct. And I was. And I don't like it because it's out of character. It means that the characters we got from the original trilogy is not the characters we have now. And it could be argued that they grew as people, but I don't love how we got here. I don't like it. And there was a plot point that I found out about when I was reading that chapter, and I specifically don't like it. And so I decided that even though I finished this book with about a 3-star rating, I'm not going to continue on with this trilogy. I loved the first trilogy with Ilona, the study trilogy, but I think I missed the boat on this one. I just needed to read it sooner, and now it's just not for me. After that, I read How to Twist a Dragon's Tail by Cressida Cowell, the 5th book in the How to Train Your Dragon series. Now, I need to put a caveat on this because I generally do not read elementary school books for a reason. I do not generally like them. However, I am allowing my older child to pick a book for me to read every month, and he has asked me to continue going through this series. And so I am, because I'm trying to be a good mom. But I wanted to say that before my review because I want you to take my review with a grain of salt. This is not meant for me, and it's not a genre I generally seek out for a reason. That being said, in this book, we are following Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III as he continues on another adventure. He needs to go replace a stone to replace the stone at a volcano to keep it from erupting, because if it erupts, it wakes a ton of dragons that are really mean, and we just don't want that. And so that is what he is trying to do. And I thought for this series, this is a solid book. The plotline was solid. I really liked the fact that we got more backstory on Hiccup's mom, who's been more or less ignored up until this point. I like that Stoic was not nearly so misunderstanding his kid, I guess. I like that we saw less of the hairy hooligans and Toothless the dragon, because they are not people I generally like. And I thought overall it was solid. It was middle of the road for this series, and if you like this series, you'll probably like this book. After that, I did read Head On by John Scalzi. This is the 2nd book in the Lock-In series. In this series, there has been a pandemic, and one of the unfortunate side effects is that some people get locked into their bodies. Essentially, their brains work, but their bodies do not. Fast forward to present day for this book, and the government has sunk a bunch of money into research, and among other things, these individuals who are locked in can pilot robot bodies. Enter our main character of Chris Shane, who is one of these locked-in individuals that uses a robot body. And they are an FBI agent, and together with their partner, Leslie Vann, they go and investigate mysterious deaths, especially of those locked-in individuals. In this book, the mysterious death happened at a sporting event. Essentially, these people who are locked in use their robot bodies to play this very, very violent sport. And usually it's not even a problem for the people who are locked in physically. until somebody dies and they have to go investigate. I liked this book. It is so good. John Scalzi is such an accessible science fiction writer. If you want to start reading science fiction, John Scalzi is generally a good place to start because it's just super easy reading. In this book, I liked the world building. It built on what we knew before. And I wouldn't say that it's expansive world building. There's still a lot we don't know about, but I did think it was at least adequate. The character development is still a bit lacking, though. We did get more, and I am very appreciative of that, but I would not say any of these characters are very well developed. The story itself was very interesting. We had a lot of moving parts for the mystery that came together very nicely at the end. I didn't think it was overly complicated. Like, I was able to follow it, which is always good. And I really liked the dialogue and the interactions of the characters. So overall, this is just a very nice read. I'm so excited. There's going to be a third book. I don't know when, but I'm going to get it because it's a good series. After that, I read Deathsworn by Leah CypRess, the first book in a duology. This is a young adult fantasy, and we are following our main character of Ilona. And Ilona used to be the most powerful sorceress of her age, and now she was losing her magic faster than anybody expected. And so, kind of as punishment, well, more like she's now useless, so her elders decide to send her off to be the tutor for the assassins. Now, this worries Ilona to some extent because the last two tutors have died under mysterious circumstances. And her elders have basically told her that she is cannon fodder. She is going to buy them time to figure out what to do. They do expect that she's going to die, but if she manages to investigate and find out some information in the meantime, that would be great. So that is such an interesting setup to me. And the first 75 pages of this was actually very good. I really liked Ilona, the main character, but she was kind of in shock. And so she was just very nihilistic, very defiant, basically like, I don't care if you kill me right now because I'm going to die eventually. It's just a little sooner than I would have thought. And that's her attitude. And it was very refreshing. And then the shock wore off and we got this very frightened, still somewhat defiant. I mean, it's just like much more of a run-of-the-mill kind of YA fantasy character. So that I didn't love, but okay. I didn't think any of the other characters were all that interesting. They existed to push the narrative forward. They didn't really feel like individuals in their own right. The story was generally good. And there were parts that were very good, where it was very interesting and different. And then there were parts that were so horribly predictable. So that was a little off-putting because it was just like, it would be very, very good. And then all of a sudden something would happen. You're like, really? You went that direction? Okay. However, overall, I did think that this was it was interesting enough and engaging enough that I did finish it. And I have intentions of reading the next book. I just don't think that this is the best example of YA fantasy. So if you are interested in the genre, I would not start here. But overall, I gave it 3 stars. And then after that, I read Heroine Worship by Sarah Kuhn, the second book in the Heroine Complex series. And in this particular book, we are following our main character of Aveda Jupiter. Now, Aveda is having a quarter-life crisis. She used to be San Francisco's only superhero, and now she's not. She used to be the most loved superhero, and now she's not. And she used to be a diva, and now everybody kind of hates her for it. And, she was making progress with the guys that she has been crushing on for years, and then all of a sudden he gives her a cold shoulder. And she's just it's identity crisis. And so she's trying to figure out who she is and who she should be and everything. Now, at the end of the last book, she did get some comeuppance. Her friend basically told her, you're being a bad friend. And so Aveda is trying to figure out how to be a good friend. However, all that means is that this is a redemption arc, which is not my cup of tea. And I walked in knowing that that was probably going to be what happened. But I was very interested in book 3 and the character we follow in book 3. So it's I'll just it won't be the most amazing read, but I'll read it anyway. That being said, I loved the main storyline. I thought it was silly and fun and ridiculous and engaging, and that's kind of what I want from most of my superhero stories. I liked most of the characters. I even eventually liked Aveda. I did not like the process of getting her to a point where I liked her, but I did like all the characters. They're unique and they're fun. But the writing itself is clunky. There are a lot of parts that just do not flow very smoothly. I thought that there were parts where it was over explaining so badly, and then there were a lot of parts that I found completely unnecessary. There was dialogue that I found to be just completely unnecessary. I honestly think they could have cut down quite a bit and ended up with like a 300-page story that would have been much stronger. And so overall, I gave this 3 stars. The parts that I liked, I really liked, and the parts I didn't. One of which was just a taste preference, and one of which was actually problematic, like a problem for the book. But I will continue on. I mean, the whole point of me reading this book was that I want to continue it on. So there you go, 3 stars. And then I read Windburn by Shannon Mayer, which is the 4th book in the Elemental series. In this series, we are following Larkspur, who in the first book of the series was accused of treason. And then she was given a couple of different options for her punishment, and she chose to become a guard. And then she decided she was going to look into this accusation of treason. And the whole series kind of goes from there. In this book, she is searching for a missing person. And there you go. That's about as much as I can give without getting into spoiler territory. But this was a weird book because the first part of the main storyline was actually, I thought, very weak. Not reminiscent of the first 3 books at all. There was the romantic storyline became like the main focus, and I'm not into it. I'm not into this particular romantic storyline for reasons I can't get into without being spoilery. And then we got to the halfway point, and like the storyline itself got much better. It was much stronger, very much more reminiscent of those first 3 books. But throughout the whole thing, the characters were kind of meh. And like at the end, at about 3/4 of the way through, there is a time lapse period that I don't think was written very well. Like stylistically, I think, or structurally, I think she could have done it. The author could have done it very differently and had a stronger. It would have come across much better. So like all kinds of weird, and honestly, I said this in the reading vlog, and I still agree with it. It's a transition. This is a transitional book. It was wrapping up the previous storylines that were setting the stage, and those 4 books, like this book and the previous 3 books, were really setting the stage for the end game. And that's where the second half was transitioning to, was let's get our character towards the end game. And I think as a transitional book, it functions fine. However, it's just not anything more than a transitional book, and not a very strong one at that. So while I did originally give this 3.5 stars, I've since downgraded it to 3. It's fine. It's just not what I was hoping for, and I am hoping that the next book will be better. I will continue this series because the first 3 books were so much better, and I'm going to go into the 5th one hoping that we get more of that instead of what we got in this 4th book. And then the last book to talk about is Magic Bites by Ilona Andrews, the first book in the Kate Daniels series. This is an urban fantasy series that follows our main character of Kate Daniels, who is a mercenary, and she is trying to find the killer of her guardian. It is urban fantasy, so we are actually in an alternate Atlanta, Georgia, where magic comes in waves, and when the magic is up, then everything technological fails. Now, the world building in this is very interesting. It's not explored very much. It is only like 260 pages. We didn't have a ton of time to explore it, but we hit on a lot of the major points, and it's interesting. It is very interesting. It is primarily based off of Slavic lore, which, especially when it was written, which is 2007, we weren't getting a lot of that. So I liked the world building, even as I think it wasn't explored enough. The characters, not my favorite. Not bad, but not my favorite. Kate is such a typical urban fantasy heroine. She's kick-ass and she's gonna be like super amazing at like, being a mercenary. The only good thing about this particular character is that she does make mistakes, and instead of being very blasé or brushing it off, she acknowledges that she makes mistakes. She has feelings about the mistakes she makes, and when there's consequences that affect other people, she does her best to mitigate those consequences, even as she's kicking and screaming because it affects her negatively. So I appreciated that. The other main character for this is Kuhn, and he's basically a male Kate. So not a whole lot of depth or variety here, unfortunately. And the story itself is fine. It is not amazing. And it's actually, to some extent, not that fun to read because this is a murder mystery. You want a detective. Kate is not a detective. She's a mercenary. She's used to kicking people's butt for information, and she can't do that. So we're basically watching her flail around, which is good. That's in line with her character. However, it's not necessarily fun to read. So I thought this was okay. It's probably, I think I said 3 stars in my reading vlog, but it's more like a 2.5. But then we get to the actual big problem with this book, and that is that this book is racist. It is ignorant white people racism. So it's nothing malicious. There's no malicious intent that I can see. There's not even anything like super big. It's like a step or two above microaggressions, right? It's not bad. I mean, it's not like the big bad things, but it is still bad. It still reinforces stereotypes. It's still hurtful, and it still made me incredibly uncomfortable to read it. So like, it was not what I was expecting. And it wasn't that there was racism on every page, but it cropped up frequently enough that I was uncomfortable the entire time reading it because I was waiting for it to be racist again, which is not good and not what I wanted. That being said, actually, I do need to give a very serious warning. Kate does describe herself using a slur for the Romani people, and it's within the first couple of chapters, and if you are sensitive to this, please be aware that it does crop up. Now, all of that being said, I am going to continue on in this series because I don't remember this kind of racism in Ilona Andrews' other books. And so I think somebody sat them down and basically said, honey, no, and taught them, or they learned themselves. I'm not really sure. But in any case, I do want to acknowledge when people learn from their mistakes, And so, and while I was uncomfortable, nothing was so offensive that I put the book down in a huff. Now, if you decide that that is too much racism for you, even just that amount, valid. I completely understand. And honestly, if this were not a reread, if I did not know Ilona Andrews as an author better, I would be in the same boat. I would not be continuing this series. But I just kind of wanted to put it out there so everybody knows, yes, there is racism in this book. You might have a problem with it. Other people might not. It's there. But that is it, you guys. Those are all the books that I read in the month of May. Please let me know down below if you agree with my assessment of these books. Let me know what you read in the month of May, what you want to read in the month of June. Let me know all down in the comments. And that's it. So until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.